Hello and welcome to MicroLive. Today we're joined by Shirley Williams, who's made a special study of the effects of computers on jobs. We'll be hearing her views later in the programme.
We'll also be looking at some of the technical problems holding up the IT revolution, and I'll be guided around one man's view of the office of the future.
But first, let's look at some of the predictions made over the last 30 years of what computers would do to our working lives.
Well, it was something completely different to what I imagined, because I couldn't really imagine anything. I'd never heard of a computer or seen a computer or knew anything about it. When I first walked in here, it was rather bewildering because everything was so modern.
Since they were introduced into business in the 1950s, computers have created a mixture of fear and fascination. Although crude and unreliable, early machines like Leo helped companies to automate both their payrolls and their internal accounting. Jobs appeared in the new world of data processing, with its own band of high priests and acolytes who fed and maintained the machines. Big companies were able to expand as computer automation brought greater efficiency and savings. But some of the savings were in paper shuffling jobs like these, which computers had now made unnecessary. Endless rooms full of people processing data by hand simply weren't needed anymore. Business was quick to start using computers for accounting, but British industry's take-up of computers for automating production was lamentably slow.
How fast do you see these processes coming into industry? Well, not as fast as I would like. Of course, they've been coming ever since mechanisms and power was first used by men. They're coming, inevitably, I think, at an accelerating rate. The speed at which they come will, in fact, determine the speed at which we improve our standard of living.
Inertia by management was matched by real fear of jobs being de-skilled by the machines. For instance, British Steel at Rotherham installed a computer to control the furnaces.
We asked two of the senior melters if they thought there was as much satisfaction in the job now that a computer was taking a share in it.
No, I don't think there is.
I should think it's like automatic pilot on an aeroplane. If he just sits back and lets it have a go, I don't know there's any more satisfaction in that, is there?
I think you like to think that you're in charge of a thing and that at the end of it you've achieved something.
At a time of full employment, a debate was beginning about the long-term effects of automation. In 1966, it reached television.
Two main points of view emerge. In the simplest possible terms, one is optimistic and the other pessimistic. Now, the optimists think that in a situation of nearly full employment, which is what we have at the moment, when you move automation into an industry, you release workers who are so badly needed that they enable other industries to expand and start producing goods which raise the general level of prosperity. The pessimists, on the other hand, fear that a situation could arise in which workers displaced by automation from one industry fail to find jobs because all the other industries are doing the same thing, installing machines and turning out the men. The result will be chronic, wide-scale, even lifelong unemployment for millions.
We could have something like 1 in 8 out of work in the early 1970s because of automation, if we sat back and did absolutely nothing. This is about sort of 3 million, and this represents, if you like, a kind of rate of redundancy of between 200,000 and 300,000.
In the 70s, a new factor appeared, the silicon chip. By drastically cutting computing costs in half each year, it now made personal computing possible. Long before the IBM personal computer appeared, word processors and personal micros were signaling change. Pundits began to predict that computers would affect whole new areas of office work, destroying jobs in the hitherto protected service sector. In the late 70s, even in Germany, the unions were calling the silicon chip the job killer. In Britain, white-collar unions like ASTMS were clearly very worried, as their public campaign showed.
Overall, it must mean a diminishing of the number of jobs available, not only in the UK, but in every industrialised country, in Europe, in the United States, absolutely everywhere. It will also go on over a considerable time period. This diminishing will go on perhaps over 20, 30, maybe even up to 50 years.
Well, all that was said before the recession. Now we have well over 3 million unemployed. Shirley, to what extent do you put that down to this new technology?
Well, we have got 3 million unemployed, and it would be a great mistake to put it down to the chip or any other part of the new technology. Because the truth of the matter is that probably about 65,000 jobs in the last 5 years have been lost because of new technology, and over 1 million have been lost because of the decline of traditional manufacturing. What really happens is that in the processes, when microelectronics comes into processes, you lose jobs. Take printing, where we've lost a great many jobs in the traditional Fleet Street graphics. On the other hand, new products which have got microelectronics in them, create jobs. Look at the Japanese with a video recorder with the very large chip and so forth. So what you get is a balance between the two. The trouble with Britain is that we brought a lot of microelectronics into the processes and lost jobs, but we haven't been very innovative in bringing them into the products and creating jobs.
When we were filming a series on robotics in the United States, we saw a most extraordinary factory there that was actually making robot bears that would sing and act the part in a chain of pizza parlours. And you can see now this is Billy Bob Broccoli, and it's a sort of piece of industry. It's a huge factory, is that it was inconceivable that could exist without new technology, and nobody could have forecast that it would happen. It's really quite intriguing because not only does it provide work for people to actually make the bears, but also to maintain them and to provide the music for them to sing in these great big chain of pizza parlours.
Absolutely, it's an awful new industry, but it has created jobs.
What else do you see as creating new jobs?
One of the areas that has grown very rapidly is the professional area and technical area. For example, in the United States, about 500,000 new jobs have been created for technicians in information technology, another 300,000 for computer specialists, and many, many more related to robotics and so forth. I think that that's going to be the great growth area, and the great dropping area is going to be, not yet, because it's been very slow, the clerical area. I think the clerical area will probably drop by many hundreds of thousands in the next 5 or 6 years, but it's all much slower than that film we saw indicates. There are still people doing shorthand typing in our offices even today.
We haven't seen this great big loss of jobs at all in Japan and the United States that we've seen here. Thank you very much, Shirley. Fred?
Well, maybe we haven't really seen the major effects of the micro-revolution yet. The people who predicted that it would sweep through offices like a plague have, to a large extent, been proved wrong. In most offices in Britain, we've been very slow to introduce automation. Or perhaps the technology is too expensive, or perhaps it's simply not good enough yet, not easy enough to use.
Well, the pundits have always predicted that as mainframes, micros and telephone networks gradually interlinked, there would be an explosion of the new technology by those people who aren't skilled in the use of computers. Executives, managers, doctors, lawyers and so on. But one of the things that's holding this up is
incompatibility. And we start our stroll down incompatibility lane right here in the home. Now, if you've got a home micro, you'll know that if you want to exchange software with a friend who's got a different machine, you can't. They're just incompatible. If you try to load this game, Elite, which is for the BBC, try to load that on the Commodore here, well, the disk fits, that's a good start. Attempt to load it up, it's searching for Elite. No, file not found error. Similarly, of course, the Beeb couldn't read a Commodore disk.
Well, things are just as bad in the business world. The two standard operating systems, CP/M and MS-DOS, are quite different. For a simple job like copying a file from one disk to another on this machine running under CP/M, we type pip A:"file B:". Whereas on this machine running under MS-DOS, we type copy A:"file B:". Very confusing and quite unnecessary.
And even where machines have the same operating system and claim to be similar, there can be problems. The IBM here and the Apricot over here, for example, use different sized disks. The keyboard layout is different. Those all-important function keys, for a start, are on the other side. Most importantly, there's no guarantee that software written for, say, this machine would run on this one, even if we could load it. But the situation is even more bizarre than that. Sometimes software won't run on different models from the same manufacturer. And you can't link programs together, not unless you're a software genius. For example, supposing I've been using this popular word processor package, and I want to incorporate this graph from Lotus 123 into my letter, and that's not an unreasonable request. Well, no can do. It's simply incompatible.
Communications between machines, except at the very simplest level, is still very difficult. The reason differences in what's supposed to be a standard for connection of modems. For example, this lead connects into this Apricot OK, but it won't connect into this Macintosh. And even when you get the hardware to work, the software may prevent micros talking to each other or to mainframes. To communicate anything other than at a very simple level is really quite tricky.
Electronic mail is very quick, very convenient, but the 5 major systems are all incompatible. If you're on one system, you can't send messages to somebody on another unless you use a telex. Just 2 weeks ago, the electronic mail service 1-to-1, who have 20% of the UK market, launched a charter for compatibility. But Telecom Gold, who've captured 70% of the market, refused to commit themselves to it. Now, Telecom Gold is part of the international Dialcom system. But we've taken this portable with its acoustic couplers to the USA, and there the things just don't work. Even if you do get the right modem, you can't access your mailbox back in Britain unless you make very expensive and special arrangements well in advance.
Well, truly portable phones have appeared recently. This one actually has a data socket. Non-standard, of course. But this one here, that doesn't have one. But you can't use either of them outside Britain. Not yet, anyway. Standards haven't been agreed, and even within Europe, the BT predict that they aren't likely to be established until the early 90s. And so it goes on. It's a bit like a world where every car uses a different sort of petrol and even different controls. Now, there's little reason why most of these problems can't be resolved given some time. In some cases, the technology isn't good enough for a standard to be agreed. But in most, it's commercial competition or even simple muddle that's holding things up.
But of course, it's not just incompatibility of hardware or software that's holding things up. There's also the incompatibility of new jobs and old skills. Shirley, just how bad is the situation?
In Britain, it's very bad. We have reason to think that something like 60,000 engineers with knowledge of information technology are needed right now by British industry. And when British industry was asked what the main reason was for not introducing microelectronics into manufacturing, the overwhelmingly strongest reason, 42% of firms gave this as their reason, was that they had nobody in the firm with the right skills.
Presumably these skills are very hard to get. Are they specialist skills?
No, they're at very many levels, I think it's fair to say, Fred. I mean, some of them certainly are advanced, sophisticated skills you probably wouldn't get unless you were a graduate. But there are a lot of intermediate skills for people with technological qualifications in areas of information technology where you very much improve your chances of getting a job if you get some kind of qualification in the field, even down to the level of people who attend the so-called ITECs, the information technology centres, where youngsters within a year can get some of the skills they need to give themselves a much better chance of a job.
There may well be youngsters watching tonight who are out of work who would like to get a job. What can they do tomorrow morning?
Well, I'd like to see them try to get into an information technology centre. There's nothing like as many places as one would like to see. If they can't do that, then I think the next best thing would be to ring up their local further education college and find out what courses there are that they could take either at home, after work, or in the college if they're not in work, if they're unemployed, in order to give themselves the skills that are needed to try to get an information technology job.
But it's all a matter of getting qualifications, is it?
I'm afraid so. There isn't a lot of room for people with no qualifications at all, and I think that youngsters who leave school without them would be very well advised to go back and try to get some kind of training, or if you like, go through open tech.
Right. Well, let's hope that the skills shortage can be rectified and that the system's incompatibility can also be sorted out. How then will the new technology affect our work environment?
Well, here's one man's idea of what tools an executive may be using in his office in a few years' time. Bob, is this a so-called paperless office we keep hearing so much about?
No, of course not. Not for the 1990s. In fact, there will still be books, as you can see here, and magazines.
Thank goodness for that. I'm pleased about that.
And waste paper bins. But if you want to keep important letters, like this one, for example, here, you'd have a fax reader. Machine reader over here. I can put it in there very carefully.
Now, this is just a mock-up of what was going on, but inside there you would expect a facsimile reader that
right.
only reads a sort of picture of the actual letter. It's not reading the content of the letter.
Correct, but then we digitise it, and then we display it on the screen.
So you can see it on your little screen here.
That's
I
correct.
See. And where are you going to store it?
I'm going to store it in what we call a read-write There you are, read-write optical reader. Optical reader. Notice the size of it, and consider that a year's amount of work and information can be stored on a thing that size.
I presume you could also send it off to your central database as
Correct.
well. That's your local one in your
right.
office. But how are you going to relocate it once you've stored it in there?
Well, first I've got to store it, right? And for that I use voice recognition. For example, let's store this one. I could say, letter, dated March 3rd, 1996, David Allen, store.
And to retrieve it?
I use the same approach.
I notice no cord on your
No,
on your
we called as
telephone.
communications then, infrared. Communications.
It still has a dial on it. Does that mean your voice recognition isn't quite good enough?
Oh no, you see, it's got a fail-safe mechanism. Should I have a cold and lose my voice, I can use a dial-up.
Okay. Show us more about your screen.
Yes, the screen is an advanced form of the flat screen which we have coming in today. But now, it's a large size.
Now it acts as a storage media as well. When you switch the computer off, it doesn't just disappear, it's there permanently and will stay there forever
That's
unless
right.
you changed it.
It's really electronic paper. And we can shuffle the paper around the board here and control it.
Show me the sort of thing you might be doing.
Well, first to control it, we have, in fact, a touch overlay. So
it acts as an input device as well as an output device.
Correct. Now, let's take, for example, the company has these branches, you see, and I want to find out what's going on in Birmingham. So I press Birmingham. Let's look at the problem areas there. So we see there's staffing, sales, production. Let's look at sales. And then we find a display here, right, showing the sales record for the quarter. And I notice that the video sales have fallen and the telecom sales have fallen.
Now, this is just a mock-up, of course, but you expect it to come up as quickly as that?
That's correct, yes.
And what would you do about it now?
Well, now I want to, in fact, ring up the head sales manager and pass him a message.
Because he might not be there.
Correct. Well, what I'm going to do is send him an annotated message on this piece of text. I'll do that. Harry, Bob, the sales are falling in your area and I want to know immediately. End message. And it's gone.
Of course, you could do that today. There are voice annotations. What's actually happened, but it wouldn't, of course, recognise your voice. It's looking up his name, it's finding his address, it knows exactly where to send the message, and it's taking that message and sending it digitally into his computer, and then when he comes into his office, he can display it and find out what's happening.
It's like a user agent behind it.
That's great. Suppose he's in his office. What have you got to offer
This
there?
is important enough that I would like to have an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation with that sales manager and his key staff. So, into teleconferencing.
Hi, Mac. Oh, hi, Bob. Good to see you. Say, Mac, I've been having a word with Francois about that contract you mentioned, and we seem to be in total agreement. Yes, Mac, if you are happy to, just say the word and we go ahead.
Well, it'd be great when we have that. In fact, British Telecom are promising something like that by the mid-90s. Is that correct?
That is true, yes.
Well, that's wonderful. But this is, you know, for your formal business place. It's where you're actually working. Very often an office is actually used for meetings, more informal communications. What can technology offer there?
Well, must be careful. The office in that time would be, in fact, for interactions. Notice that the profile of the flat screen doesn't obstruct any of the communications around the desk. And, for example, let's look at this doodle I'm doing here. I could display that doodle on the same flat screen, but now used as an electronic whiteboard.
I see. So, but what happens if he wants to change it, if you're with a meeting of your managers? Does he have to push you out of the way and get at your work desk?
No,
here?
you'll have, in fact, something like this, an electronic pen, which you can, in fact, go up there and make adjustments and changes to it.
So I no longer have to use my Polaroid to take pictures of my whiteboard to see what's going on and record it?
In fact, on my flatbed printer here, since you've been a good boy, you can have a copy.
Well, that's very, very good indeed. Now, what happens when you're away from the office? You've got all this equipment when you're sitting here. What happens when you go on tour or you're outside of your office?
Well, under here, I have a keyboard. The
you
intelligent
have a keyboard.
Oh, yes, it won't go away.
You haven't got rid of that yet.
Oh, no. And this, in fact, is a computer. You can expect by the mid-1990s to have the mainframe of today squeezed into a keyboard like this, the intelligent keyboard. And it also will have something like 20 megabytes of RAM memory. So I can, in fact, open my briefcase, and, of course, you have another flat screen there.
Which, again, doesn't need to be plugged into the computer to keep its memory in there. Everything is recorded and kept
right.
there.
And I have the telephone, which, in fact, is a cellular telephone, and which I can use to, in fact, contact you on the way home, in case I've forgotten to tell you something.
Is it science fiction? Do you really believe it's going to happen?
It is certainly going to happen. All the technology is here today. The problem is putting it together.
Of course, the important part you've missed out is inside that computer itself, and that's all the software. And integrating the system together is one of the great problems of today, isn't it? How much is it all going to cost, though? Isn't it going to be too expensive for people to be able to afford to put these into their offices?
No, I think the technology's prices are going to be rapidly falling, particularly the optical disc, the flat screen, and voice recognition. They're all here now. It's a question of getting the price down.
And the same with computers. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you.
Fred.
Well, it's not just the office where changes may be on the way. Banking, for example, used to be considered as a job for life. Now it seems as ripe for rationalisation. Put simply, if a job is highly defined, it could be automated. In Europe, banking hours tend to suit the banks and not their customers.
Accidenti, sono già le 4.
So in Italy, they're experimenting with a network which would bring the computer into every part of a local bank and allow it to stay open long after normal banking hours.
Accidenti.
Most of the people working behind the counter are doing tasks easily performed by a computer. Now machines costing just £8,000 can be trusted to monitor the paying out and the handing in of money throughout the entire local branch. At the moment, this bank is a prototype, as is its cash. After being placed in a counting device, the deposit is recorded on the bank's own computer. That computer keeps a printed record of money being paid in and out. In conventional banks, this tally is balanced up at the end of the day by backroom staff and can take up to 2 hours.
Avrei bisogno di prelevare 200.000 lire.
In this bank, the computer balances up the flow of cash as it goes along. So if the staff don't have to do all the traditional counting up after hours, the bank doesn't need to close so early. The installation of systems like this would mean more people to serve customers, longer opening hours, but fewer staff in the back room.
Grazie a lei.
Prego. Buongiorno.
So there we have it once again. Jobs lost in one area, but balanced by new services created in another. American experience has shown that so far professional and management jobs are relatively untouched, but all that might change with the newly developing expert systems. Expert systems are pieces of software which can reason, well, in specialist areas at least, using rules which human experts have provided. Edward Feigenbaum is one of the leading names in artificial intelligence.
Well, any tasks that can be narrowly defined in the office situation will be amenable to treatment by expert systems relatively soon. For example, inventory control or writing up certain kinds of reports or analyzing financial reports, or to take an example that's quite recent, selecting a price for an underwriting risk in an insurance company, or deciding whether to make a loan to a customer in a bank. These are quite specific tasks that we'll see come online relatively soon.
The airlines were among the first to computerize themselves with what has become a gigantic worldwide reservations network. Now they're among the first to use expert systems along with traditional data processing. Competition has forced many airlines, like America's Northwest Orient, to offer discount seats on busy routes to attract customers. It costs hundreds of pounds a minute to keep a jumbo jet in the air. But of course, discount fares mean you get less money per seat than you do for a normal full fare. So the secret of maximizing your revenue is juggling the sales of the two sorts of seats. And this depends on how well you and your competitors are doing. Northwest Orient employs highly paid people to make judgments of this kind, moment by moment.
They have experts online to their systems all the time, monitoring the seats on a plane to decide how many discount seats shall be made available on any flight. The Sperry database management system called Mapper outputs a set of reports to these experts, and these experts make sensitive judgments at each moment about how to adjust the number of discount seats.
Now, Pete, up until now, we've talked quite a bit about factors that would lead to a decision to decrease the number of discount seats on a flight.
Using an expert from Northwest Orient Airlines, the knowledge engineers at Sperry and IntelliCorp developed an expert system to accept those reports from Mapper automatically and propose recommended discount seats to the airline seat controllers.
What about the opposite, the increasing? What sorts of factors would be involved there?
Well, the things we look at now are basically how far in advance we are from the day of departure, and also what triggers it, maybe if we're running out of seats. We currently have a report that tells us if we have 5 or less seats available in a particular discount class.
Using the rules teased out of the experts by the software or knowledge engineer, the electronic expert system is now up and running. At present, it's helping those expensive employees to confirm their decisions. But how long before it takes over from them and makes the decisions all by itself?
The expert system can review all factors all the time. It's even faster and more reliable than the human expert.
Their estimate is that if they can upgrade one seat from discount to business full fare for 25% of their flights, that amounts to $3 million a year, and the system will pay itself back in a fraction of a year.
Shirley, do you think we'll see a bigger impact from the new technology on jobs in the future than we've seen so far?
Oh, I think without any doubt at all. One of the areas where I think we will see heavy job losses is the clerical area, because there has been so far a fairly slow adaptation into the new technologies, and all the American projections indicate that that will be one area of substantial job loss. But don't forget, it's always slower than the experts think it's going to be. On the other hand, in spite of expert systems, I don't think we're going to see a rapid decline in the demand for professionals and for technicians, because as we create more and more new products, so we're going to need more and more people who are able to maintain them, to understand them and to design them, and I think that's going to be the big area of job creation.
Well, although there may be a bigger demand for professionals and technicians, we can also see a lessening in demand for middle management or junior management, because as information becomes more freely available, they become less and less necessary. We see a squashing down of the pyramid in corporations.
I think that's right. I think the corporation will have a kind of pancaking effect where the middle and line management begin to disappear. On the other hand, I think more and more corporations are going to actually take work out-house to consultants and to computer firms that are meeting a particular need for, let us say, a specialised piece of software. So we're going to see a big increase in the self-employed and in consultancies, but at the same time, you rightly say, fewer people on the corporation's books who are employed as middle managers.
Well, they're very expensive with their cars and large offices and secretaries and so on, and perhaps... Do you see a growth of jobs in large corporations, or do you see it in smaller corporations?
No, again, I think almost all the evidence from both the United States and Japan is that the small companies are the big job creators, something like twice as fast as their share of the employment overall, whereas big companies in all countries are losing jobs pretty fast now.
Do you see expert systems really having the impact that we saw in that film?
Yes, but I think expert systems open up huge new markets. Let me just take one example. Medical expert systems are now being used to help people who are badly or ill-qualified doctors, sometimes even barefoot doctors in the third world, to bring the expertise of the really leading figures in the medical world to bear on particular cases, because they describe the symptoms and then they get advice from somebody who is infinitely better qualified than they are. So I think expert systems could open up a real chance of creating jobs to assist the third world.
Can we learn anything from Japan and the United States of what we should do in our educational system?
Oh, yes, we can. I think the most worrying single thing about Britain is that our education system, in many ways a good system, is also very much geared to the past. I think there are two things we have to learn. The first is that we need a much broader basis. The A-level is a mistake. It narrows down people between science and maths on the one side, arts on the other, and they really need both for the world of information technology. And secondly, we've got to bring together vocational qualifications and academic ones, because we need thinkers who can make things and makers who can think about where they're going. And in many ways, the British system segregates people with vocational qualifications from the academic. It's a very great tragedy, in my view.
And finally, don't you think that the Americans are very much better at in-house corporate training than the British are?
Unbelievably. 3% of the wage cost of American corporations goes into training. In the case of Britain, it's 0.15%. It's not 1/10 of the American expenditure. And unless we begin to spend on the retraining of adults, we're going to have a lot of people unemployed who don't need to be.
Shirley Williams, thank you very much. Fred.
And that's all for this week. Next week, we'll be reporting on the Atari Computer Show being held this week in London. There's a look at the way the RAF are using micros to train their air traffic controllers, and we'll be suggesting some alternative languages to the ubiquitous BASIC. So that's goodbye from me. And it's goodbye from me. And it's goodbye from them. Goodbye.